Y'all ready? You think we're getting 5 here, Dronos? You think we get 5? All right, here we go. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 5-stars, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, come on! 13 or 14, I think, is max. 13? What's good, college football gamers? It's your boy Fan checking in with our very first recruiting video of college football 26. As you just saw, last year we culminated in a true dominance of all things recruiting, and we started with a video just like this. To get us going this year, I'm going to treat this like recruiting 101, and we're going to start with the basics. For new players to Dynasty, I'm not going to assume any knowledge of recruiting at all. While the game does a decent job telling us what each individual feature does, there's no streamlined tutorial into how it all fits together. For veterans of the series or folks rejoining me from last year after all the work we put into recruiting, I'm also going to include some advanced tactics here, as well as how some of our strategies are going to have to change year over year. Most of the core skills we built on last year are still good to go, but there's going to be some important adjustments we're going to have to make. There's tons to get to, so let's hop right into it. Here's how to recruit in college football 26. To start every season, you'll set up your recruiting board for the first time in the preseason. The number of hours you have to spend in the setup phase will depend on the star level of your school. The more stars, the more hours you'll have to spend. Importantly, you have more hours here than you will have weekly during the season itself. Our example here, Rutgers, is a 2.5-star school and has 625 total points to spend in the preseason. That number will drop to 500 weekly after the setup phase. The worst team in the game, the Akron Zips, will start at 375 hours and move to 300 during the season. And the best teams in the game, the 5-stars, start at around 1250 and will drop to 1,000. So depending on your star level, you'll drop between 75 and 250 total hours. It's important to know, or at least estimate, the difference between your preseason or setup hours and your regular season hours, as you'll have to do a little bit of math here to figure out how many prospects you should add. In my opinion, you should be targeting as many players as you can open up the year by sending the house on. It's your most powerful opening move to gain influence on a prospect, and it costs 50 hours to use. So if we're sticking with our example school, Rutgers, and knowing I'll have 500 hours to really open up the year, I'm going to pick 10 prospects to add to my board at this time. Keep in mind, you should not be planning to bring in 35 recruits every year. Even if you only did this for 3 years in a row and sent everybody to the draft in their junior year, you wind up with a roster of 105 players. Do it for the traditional 4 years and you're up to 140, just way too many bodies to carry. So unless you're chasing a top recruiting class, and we're going to go over how to do that in a future video, there's no need to fill out your board with 35 prospects. If you are aiming for a top recruiting class, which you'll need to unlock Elite Recruiter, you will need to fill all 35 of those spots. More on that later. For now, back to the basics. When you go to add a prospect to your board, the default sort will be the recommended prospects for you. You can hold down R2 or the right trigger to see some more specific sorts as well. We're going to use this later. This page is useful to see what your relative star level attainable is, and if you sort the list a couple of times, you can see the bottom and top end quality of who the game is recommending you target. I don't pay much attention to the low end, but the high end is good to identify your targeted star level. Importantly, this filter has also cut out a ton of guys, so you're not seeing everyone that's available here. My guy Max Plays CFB did a great video on it last year, but the synopsis is each sort can only show you a given number of prospects. That display number went way up this year, but you should still want to be as specific as possible when you actually go to pick your guys. So for me, the recommended tab is going to show you the top end star level I should be targeting, and I'm going to use R2 or the right trigger to open up a more specific sort, scroll down to that star level tab, and make my selections from there. Now that I know around where I should be looking, it's time for me to make some choices as to who to add to the board. You obviously want to pick guys who you have a good chance to land. Without considering any skills helping you out, your best indicator of success with a prospect, at least on first impression, is your pipeline tier, which can be no tier at all or from 1 through 5, with 5 being the highest pipeline tier available. The pipeline tier is not really a detail that you can afford to misunderstand during recruiting. If you think of the whole process like a race, your pipeline tier is just the size of the engine in your car. So even if a tier 1 pipeline is giving it everything they've got against a 4-tier pipeline school, if the 4 tier is doing the same, the 1 is hopeless. There will always be some exceptions, but in the moment, it's usually going to be better to take that guy off of your board and redirect your hours somewhere where you have a better shot. So while it's not always the wrong move to chase, and again, some coaching skills can help make up the difference, part of being a great recruiter is being an efficient recruiter. Wasting hours, no matter how many you have to work with, is the path to a terrible class. Identifying prospects you aren't likely to land early and cutting your losses is how to really be great on the recruiting trail. So you've set up the board with a good number of prospects for your school, considering the drop that you'll see in hours into the regular season. You found out your approximate range of prospects you should be targeting, and you pick the ones you have the best chance with or are willing to gamble on anyway. And now you have a few more things to do before moving on to your season. The order of operations for this next part can kind of be dealer's choice, but you must make sure that you're leaving this phase with scholarship offers for everybody. This phase is also the only one that I scout in. You can make the argument that the best schools can get away with burning more hours on scouting throughout the year, but I'll go so far as to say that if you're like 3.5 stars or under, this is the only spot you should be scouting, period. It's really just a luxury you can't afford when hours are at a premium. So I'll offer the scholarships first, and you can use L2 to filter down to the players who still need a scholarship, and this will just let you spam X or A to offer everyone on your board. Afterwards, I'll use L2 to flip to the screen that shows me the not fully scouted players and do the same here to work through the hours I have left. Once everyone's scouted, any gems I uncover move immediately to the top of the board by holding R2 and moving them around, and any busts I uncover at this juncture, I'm usually going to take off the board completely. If you've used the filter I suggested, you will have to scroll back to any prospect to see whether or not they popped a gem or a bust. And we can see here that of our 10, we uncovered 1 bust in DeMar Jackson, but also 1 gem down here in Thomas Irwin. Irwin goes to the top of the board, and if I was going to see this class through, I'm probably just taking DeMar Jackson off of my board completely. As with everything, there can be exceptions. If you can put a 4-star on your board with a 5 pipeline tier as the Akron Zips, I don't really care if he's a bust or not. Generally, a bust will have comparable starting attributes, although oftentimes worse, but will always be buried with a normal dev trait. And that low and slow progression is what can really kill prospects throughout their career. New in College Football 26, though, dev traits can be upgraded in the offseason, so I think that makes busts more viable than they've been in the past, so you can decide based on who the guy is and what his attributes look like, since he will be fully scouted by the time you find out that he's a bust. As needed, you can return to add prospects if you remove any during the scholarship and scouting phase of the preseason. I said the order was dealer's choice, and you could save yourself scholarship hours by scouting first and uncovering your bust, but just make sure you've done the math correctly or hard stop on scouting as soon as you only have enough hours to offer the scholarships. Here at Rutgers, with 5 hours per offer, if I'm leaving here with 10 on my board, I'll need to save 50 hours for their scholarships. So even though scouting first might technically be the economical play and save you 5 or 10 hours on the bust removal here or there, I just do it this way to simplify things for myself. A decent counterpoint is having a scholarship offer alone will gain you a small amount of influence on a prospect, and I've heard people use that as evidence that you should fill up your board. I just think it's such a small dose and can really jam up your recruiting board as a whole when you're going to want to keep things simple throughout the year. Way easier to miss a strategic move when you have 35 on your board rather than 10. So you pick your prospect strategically, you have scholarship offers on, you've scouted as much as you could, and it's time to move on to the regular season of recruiting. I've jumped over to a Rutgers save file that's a few years in and midway through the season, so I'll be able to explain better the phases and all the details here in recruiting, so don't mind the hours discrepancy top right, as winning a couple natties has us sitting at a 4-star here. But that won't be important for what we're explaining here, just for the more observant of you. Here I'm going to explain the process a recruit goes through before they sign and where you can find out how close they are to their decision and where you fit in for them. The first bit to understand here are the stages of recruiting. Sometimes a recruit won't start at the beginning of this progression, and you can tell their specific phase in the relevant column, but the order goes from open, where they've only locked schools out based on deal breaker and are otherwise entertaining anyone. Then they'll move to their top 8, where any school not in their top 8's locked out and can't recruit the prospect at all anymore. Back to our recruiting board, since all the guys we've targeted are in their top 5 or top 3 phase, the same is true here. So open to top 8, to top 5 to top 3, and then finally their decision. Brand new this year are recruiting battles. So if two schools are neck and neck at the decision phase after the top 3, sometimes you'll see a recruiting battle trigger, which is just two schools with one more week to make their case. It'll work the same as any other stage, but will be between the last two schools and means a decision is imminent. So stages will indicate where you need to be on their list to avoid getting cut off and having wasted your hours on them up to that point. Top 8 keeps you in the mix, but at the top 5 phase, you open up the real substance of recruiting actions with all these options you now have to pick from. I'm going to explain what each one does and when to use it, but your basic recruiting actions are much simpler, so we can start with those. The more hours you spend between the 5, 10, 25, and 50 options, combined or multiplied by your pipeline tier, the more influence you gain on a prospect. The more influence you gain, the more you learn about them, and thus the more of their interests you uncover. That's this graph here to the right of the screen. Stuff they don't care about is marked with a red X. Each prospect will also have specifically 3 green checks, which are the stuff they do care about. Those 3 things grouped together make up their perfect pitch. That's going to be important. Worth noting, you shouldn't read too much into the green arrows beside each basic recruiting action. At face value, it seems like you could get more green arrows worth of influence with the 5, 10, and 25 options than you could by just sending the house if you compare the green arrows alone. We did the relevant testing, and the arrows aren't quantitative like that. It's just as simple as the more hours, the more influence. So don't overthink that part, but you aren't crazy if you noticed it and assumed you could get a better value. I'm not sure why they have the arrows the way they do, but it doesn't actually work like that. By the time you get to the top 5 phase and unlock all these other options, you'll have learned some things about the prospect and will likely have a handful of X's, maybe a couple green checks. And here, just like last year, you'll sometimes be able to deduce a prospect's perfect pitch, even if you can't actually see all 3 of their checks. I'm going to show you an example here in just a second, but for the veterans, they did make some changes here for 26, so I'm going to explain those differences to the vets first and then give some more examples of when you can do this and when you can't for the new guys. To make the preamble as short as possible, they made this more difficult this year in a couple different ways. First, it seems like they raised the percentage of time that the first green check you uncover is their deal breaker. Last year, there didn't seem to have a probability tie there, and if a prospect had a deal breaker, you knew right away that that was going to be one of their green checks, whether it was uncovered or not. That can still happen this year, and actually is going to happen with this example, but it does happen less frequently. In the same way, you'll also get caught between 2 pitches based on your process of elimination way more frequently this year. You should still check every time to see if you could find their perfect pitch, but you're going to find yourself caught between at least 2 way more often than you did. In my opinion, this makes soft sells slightly more viable this year in a way that it just wasn't last year. It didn't feel worth it to guess with how early we were usually able to find the correct perfect pitch and just hard sell it, but this year I think soft sell re-enters the conversation for situations like that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Mike McCroy here is actually a great example of us using a few bits of information that the prospect is giving us to skip some steps and get ahead of the game. We see here to the right that we know pro potential is one of his interests. In Mike McCroy's case, his deal breaker was not indeed the first check that we uncovered, and we know that it's brand exposure. So even though brand exposure does not have a green check next to it, we know that that is the second one of his green checks. Now you can go through a process of elimination with hard sells. If you know brand exposure and pro potential need to be part of the perfect pitch, you'll scroll through to see which pitches could make sense based on what you know. Here with football influencer, pro potential is checked, as is brand exposure, but we know that playing time is definitely not one of his interests based on the red check there. So football influencer, although it fits 2 out of the 3, is not indeed his perfect pitch. After scrolling through everything, the only pitch that could be his perfect pitch, since we know the free green check from his deal breaker is brand exposure, we already have uncovered pro potential, and the only pitch that fits on an uncovered interest otherwise is gym rat. So here, by looking at the deal breaker, we uncovered a free point of interest, and then through process of elimination, we're able to jump ahead by 2 green check marks and get to a hard sell way early. If you take nothing else away from this video, the crux and most important thing that you can do is deduce your hard sell early, get it right, and have good enough grades to make it make sense. We're going to talk about that more in a second here. Once I know I have the correct hard sell, I'll usually just throw on the extra 10 hours for bonus influence to really knock it out of the park. We mentioned it earlier, but soft sell could be useful if you wind up stuck between two choices. But in a case like that, I'd usually rather just leave other actions on to get more influence that I need, and hopefully next week just be able to hard sell on what I know to be the perfect pitch. Even if it's a really tight race, if I want a Hail Mary play, I might just guess on one of the two hard sells and hope that I got it right. But again, that would only be in case of emergency. So for the second year in a row, I'm really just not using soft sell at all. But you should still know what it does and know what it means. It's just a lower penalty for guessing their perfect pitch incorrectly if you can't know it for sure. I'm gonna have to do some more experimenting with soft sell to find more instances where it makes sense, but from everything I've learned last year and another 100 or so hours on the game already this year, this just isn't one of your better mechanics. Similarly, sway is back this year, and it was the most misunderstood recruiting action in the game last year. They tried to make it a little more clear with what it does and your odds of success with some added UI to the right of the screen, but again, I just don't really ever find myself with the occasion to use it. It doesn't work like any of the other actions by giving you influence. Let me say that again. Sway is not giving you influence with these 30 hours. What it does when it's successful is add another perfect pitch to the prospect. So in game, that means essentially adding a green check to their list where there was not one before. So in theory, you might use this when your school grades are bad in at least one of their green check buckets, and sway is there to try to make them care about something they didn't before. If the pitch you're trying to sway them to has green checks in common with what they already like, you have a better chance of success. So if the pitch you want to sway to shares 2 green checks, you have a pretty good chance at adding the pitch that you've chosen. But it's not guaranteed. If there's only 1 green check of overlap between their pitch and the one you want to sway them to, your odds of adding that pitch go down a lot. And if they just don't care about anything you want them to care about and shares 0 green check interest with the pitch that you're trying to sway them on, you're almost guaranteed to fail with a low odds of success. The use cases for sway are so few and far between, and your odds for success being limited, I really just can't do much in the way of advocating for this feature. It's truly been a one-off for me in multiple years and dozens of seasons recruiting on the game. But you should at least understand how it works to avoid misusing it like I know many people have done before. For me, it's just not coming into play for the majority of your recruiting, but remember it's there for the one time in your career you might need it. And just to flex if you can, if you're at a huge school and you just want to set up a dual knockout mega punch of influence, you could try it, but honestly, I still don't think it's worth it even then. Visits are also back and they've been buffed a little bit. There are a bunch of new skills across the tree that can help the effects from visits, and I gotta think that's a response to people like me who last year just completely swore off of visits as a whole. I was landing more recruits faster not visiting at all than I was when utilizing the feature as much as I could, and after I did the A and B testing, I just never went back. This year though, the cost for some visits will slide depending on how close or far away the prospect lives to campus. It'll be cheaper to bring in a local guy than it will be to fly someone in from across the country. Personally, I'm still using visits pretty sparingly and almost never if they cost more than 25 hours. You must win on a visit week for it to be a net positive to the prospect. So if you're winning all the time, this will be no sweat for you, and you consider scheduling inexpensive visits you know you'll win for to get the relevant influence boost. But if you're struggling with a smaller school, I don't think the risk of wasting the visit hours on a loss or just not landing that prospect in the end wind up being worth it for you. And again, even at big schools, I'm generally able to land prospects before that week 8-ish mark when you see the majority of visits starting to be scheduled. But obviously big prospects will get scheduled much earlier, so you can use visits and their sliding costs as you see fit. But for what it's worth, I'm still not all the way in on them as a generally effective tool in recruiting. The skill tree and sliding costs may well change that big time this year. In terms of your most efficient path, it's generally going to be sending the house until you can hard sell on good grades and then stack that extra 10 hours on just because you can. The question becomes, what grade should I hard sell on and when should I just keep sending the house? And we got the answer on that last year too. Generally, if you're averaging around a B-, that's going to be worth hard selling between the 3 grades. If they're averaging around a C to a C+, it's going to be about a wash with sending the house, and if it's worse than that, you should definitely definitely just keep sending the house for the bigger influence game. As the season goes on, you should be combing your board to move hours around based on how things are looking with your prospects. If you're in the situation we're in here, ahead of the pack with a great pipeline tier and an advantage, you are good to go and locked in to land this prospect. So if you want to, you can afford to cut some hours here and spend them elsewhere on the board based on your priority. Maybe for a visit on a closer prospect, or if you need to, adding someone new to the board completely and cutting your losses if you don't think you're going to be able to land somebody. I've said it a few times, but that pipeline tier is really your best indicator of success. In this example, we're showing for first place interest with Vernon Quick for now, but we are working with no pipeline tier advantage at all, while Texas is working with a 5 pipeline tier advantage. We know Texas is at least interested based on offering Vernon a scholarship, but we also know that they didn't spend much time on him last week based on the relatively low amount of interest they gained with him. But even on top of things and not showing like Texas is gaining quickly, this is a prospect I would say we almost certainly do not land. The same is true in the inverse. Here we see with Isaiah, we're showing for 3rd place in interest, but the 2 schools ahead of us have an inferior pipeline tier to us, and he's only in his top 8 phase. That tells us that we have plenty of time, we have a bigger engine in our car than any of our competition, and if we want this guy and turned up our recruiting actions, despite being in 3rd for now, this is absolutely a guy we could probably land very easily. It's really these combing actions that you'll go through throughout the year that'll separate your best classes from your worst ones. But I hope this video gave you a great starting point on understanding how you can read your board, predict success, get to a hard sell early, and be the most efficient recruiter you can be. Make sure to leave me any comments below with questions, concerns, or criticisms, as many of your ideas spawned videos all year last year, and I'd love for that to be the case again this year. As always, I've been Fend, y'all have been great, it's so good to be back, and I'll catch you in the next video.